Hey Raw players, what's going on? It's the Bard here, welcome back to the corner, and today's topic is going to be all about the Shapeshifting Druid. Man, I love playing Shapeshifting Druids. They're just so interesting. It's amazing to just be able to turn your character into any kind of creature you like and really adapt to whatever situation you've got in front of you. So there's no matter how many different things are going on in the game, there's bound to be something that one of your animal forms can be of use for. That being said, however, when it comes to straight up combat, there are a few little holes in the Shapeshifting Druid, and I think if we can just plug those a little bit, we can really make the thing not only viable, but actually pretty powerful. Let's have a look. So in order for a Druid of the Circle of the Moon to work, you really need to understand what it can and can't do. So first and foremost, as a Circle Druid, you're going to be able to ignore those restrictions, or at least some of them anyway, when it comes to the maximum amount of challenge rating of a beast that you can assume. So when you assume your beast form, you're going to be at least a challenge level 1. So there are some really good picks in level 1. However, you also do need to be aware of the limitations on flight or swim speed. You're not allowed to have those yet until you actually level up your druid level. So just be aware of that one. The best and probably easiest thing that you can turn into straight away as a circle druid would be a brown bear. And it actually works really well, and it's a very, very good starting point, and it really helps us with our druid that we're building here. In fact, it's probably going to be one of your most used forms until you can get to, say, level 6, where you'll then be able to take advantage of the rule that states that 1/3 of your character level is equal to the challenge rating of the highest level animal that you can then transform into. So, I mean, we are going to need to get familiar with the monster manual soon, but that's not anything to worry about. We can sort that out at a much later date. In the meantime, however, let's just get on with the standard low-level stuff. One thing I absolutely adore about this character is that your stats mean nothing. It doesn't matter if you have the worst stats in the world, they do not matter. All of your strength, all of your dexterity, all of your constitution is going to be replaced when you turn into any kind of animal form using your wild shape. It doesn't matter. It's all going to be replaced. Your intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, they're going to stay the same, but they're not that important to you, especially if you're not concentrating on being an offensive spellcaster. What you might want a high wisdom for is, if you need a good spell save DC, but to be honest, all your attacking is going to be with your wild shape form, so you don't need to really concentrate too much on that. There are going to be those odd situations where you kind of might want to have it, but then again, it's a team-based game, so you don't need good stats. That's the first thing about it. It's so good. You don't need good stats. Second of all, when you transform, you assume the beast's hit points and hit dice. This is great. You get free hit points, essentially. Because what's going to happen is you're going to get those hit points, and then when you eventually, or if you eventually get knocked out, then the damage kind of rolls over onto your existing total. So, you've got a huge amount of hit points to work with. So, I mean, all this stuff sounds great, but there are going to be issues that you're going to have to face. And one of the biggest ones is you're not going to be able to do any spell casting. And that's a flat, no spell casting at all. Once you hit level 18, of course, your primal magic will then come into play. But level 18, that's so far away. You want to enjoy being a player right now. You don't want to wait that long. It's just too far away to be of any real value. What I like to do is I like to look at these sort of low-level encounters that you're going to be dealing with, because, you want to look at what's playable now. So the way I'm seeing this is, if you want to be a shape-shifting druid, then you want something that's going to help with that. And the fact that you can't cast spells is a bit of a hindrance. So it's probably a good idea to find things that you can use that aren't going to be spellcasting based. And there's a lot of them which are spellcasting based in this game. So what can we do, and how can we, improve that? So I've heard people saying, I think a few levels of rogue would be really good for the druid, because when you're doing your attack, you can get your sneak attack damage on, and all these other little bits and pieces. And I'm thinking, well, that's a good idea, but it's not practical and it's not sustainable, especially not for a druid. Druids that have multiple attacks aren't actually going to get the benefit of multiple sneak attacks because it's limited to one per turn. So I was looking at something different. I was actually looking at the Barbarian. Now, what's probably instantly people are thinking is, well, you can't Barbarian Rage and you can't cast spells together. So yes, this is true. But since you're in wild shape, you can't cast your spells anyway. So why not then go into Barbarian for, say, 2 or 3 levels, and then whilst you're in your wild shape form, you can then take advantage of some of the bonuses and defenses that the Barbarian gets. And there are a lot of really good ones in here. Some that really help the Druid to perform its task even better than what it was doing before. So what the Barbarian does is it really helps to cover some of those weaknesses that the Druid has when it's in its wild shape. Because even though you've got a fairly good damage output, you could always do with a little bit more. So since you can't cast spells, you can't rely on that to really buff you. So instead, if you're doing the whole Barbarian multiclass and you only want about 3 levels of it or something, you can get a bit of extra damage out of your rage because you have at least another +2 on all your weapon attacks. Now just have a look in the back of the book and look at claw attacks and stuff like that. You actually see that all the sort of beast attacks are counted as melee weapon attacks or weapon attacks of some description. They actually make some of the other abilities even more useful. A good example of this would be if you're a frenzy barb. So you can then use frenzy starting at level 3, which will allow you an extra single melee weapon attack. And since claws are counted as melee weapon attacks, you get the claw damage and you get the rage damage as well. So, it's win-win. So we've already established that Barbarian is really good for attacking, but what about for our defense? Okay, so we've got our Barbarian Rage on, which is allowing us extra damage, but it's also giving us resistance to, your common attacks like bludgeoning, piercing, slashing. So this, in essence, doubles the amount of hit points you have, simply because you're only taking half damage from common attacks. Something that also might be worth noting when you're doing your wild shape is that when you transform, you actually get to keep some of your other abilities. Even though you're not allowed to do any spellcasting, you retain benefits from any features from like your class or your race or other sources that you can use in your new form, as long as you're physically capable of doing it. The example they use is you can't use dark vision unless your new form also has dark vision. But, on the flip side, if you have something like, say, your armor class, which is very, very low for a druid in wild shape form, and this is one of the drawbacks. You have X amount of hit points which you get added onto your own total, but you can only stay in that form for so long because once you lose those hit points, you then revert. So even though you're not really taking any extra damage, it's only practical as long as you can stay in that form. So this is obviously where the rage comes into effect, which allows you obviously to prolong that wild shape form for more rounds because you're only taking half damage. But it's better if you can actually not be taking any damage at all. And you've got this low armor class, but what the Barbarian has is it has its unarmored defense. So your armor class, when you're not wearing any armor, is equal to 10 plus your dexterity modifier plus your constitution modifier. So what's happening is your stats change when you wild shape, but that ability should theoretically still happen. So the bear has like 10 dexterity, but it also has like 16 constitution. So you should be able to up your AC to 13. It's not a big difference, but every little bit helps, especially because, you can still wear items in your wild shape form. So armor is out of the question because it can't change and it can't adapt to the shape of your wild shape. But, things like rings and pendants and the like, which offer bonuses, would technically still be allowed. As a little extra added bonus, you still get to keep your danger sense, where you get your advantage on dexterity saving throws when it comes to traps and spells and the like. So, it's just a bit more added on. And to be honest, if you're going to be risking your life out there adventuring, you want every advantage you can get. So being that your stats change when you wild shape, it really doesn't matter what race you pick. However, there are some cool abilities which I think really help the Shapeshifting Druid. So if I'm going to pick a race that's going to be ideal for combat shapeshifting, I would have to go with Half-Orc. I think it's such a good race now in 5th edition. For example, you've got your savage attacks. So when you score your critical hit on your melee weapon attack, which does count for your natural claws and bites, because we've already established this earlier, you get an extra dice. That's really, really good. Just add on some extra damage, and why shouldn't you? You know, it's good stuff. But what I really like is the relentless endurance. Because when you're reduced to 0 hit points but not killed outright, you can drop to 1 hit point instead. But it never states in what form. And this is where the real beauty of the build comes in. Because if you do take a big heavy hit, like a critical, and you are, knocked out of your druid form, according to Relentless Endurance, which you're allowed to use because of what Wild Shape states, that you can use abilities from race or class, you would then be knocked down to 1 hit point. So you could then use your abilities where you can sacrifice your spells on your turn to get your hit points back up. And because you're still active, your rage doesn't end. So your rage is still going, you're halving everything that you're taking every time, you're getting basically twice as much hit points as you normally would have, you're getting twice as many essentially hit points from sacrificing your spells. And if you do get unfortunate enough to get knocked out of your druid form, you get to proc the Relentless Endurance on 1 hit point, which might keep you in that wild shape form just a little bit longer in order for you to do the damage you need to. So I think Half-Orc is an amazing strategic race to pick if you're going to be doing a lot of upfront combat. And that's what you want to be doing. You want to be doing upfront combat with the Shapeshifting Druid. You want to be in there and you want to get your attacks on. So yeah, I really can't recommend a better class. You might want to go human if you want an extra feat, but I think Half-Orc all the way. So a few levels of Barbarian actually still helps to keep the class pretty balanced. Now, if you really don't care about spellcasting, then you can, choose to multiclass into other things. Fighter has got some cool options in it, especially if you're going Battle Master. But I would say don't do this. Now, even though if you're only going with, say, 3 levels of Barbarian, you still get access to the top tier spells at the very end of your Druid progression. But what's going to happen if you put more levels into something else is you're not going to get as much challenge rating available when you're doing your wild shape. The most amount of Druid levels you can get is 17 if you've got, say, 3 levels of Barbarian. Now, the most challenge rating of Beast level you can get out of that is challenge level 5. You can't quite hit 6 because you're not level 18. So, really consider the fact that how many levels you take in something else is going to affect, the quality of the form that you can take higher up. I would not overdo your multiclass too much. I mean, even if you just want to pick the Druid just because you want the shapeshifting ability, you want higher Druid levels so that you can get better shapeshifting. It's as simple as that. But if you don't care about the spells, then just, sack them for the extra hit points. That's where the big value comes into them. If you're getting your spell level and a multiple of it is additional hit points back, for a bonus action, it's really worth it, especially if you do not care about spellcasting. So keep them there, have them if you need them for when you're in human form and you're doing all your socials, or you're, if you're, being relied on for some healing or whatever. Always, be adding to your druid level. Don't over multiclass, because it's going to hinder you in the long run. But you still get a good balance of damage and defense, and still a good, maximum challenge rating from having a few multiclass levels, just not going too far into it. As far as feats go, or ability score improvements, I've already explained to you that all your ability scores are going to change to match whatever animal form you're in. So making up your own ability scores isn't really of any value to you. So you're pretty much always going to want to take the feat. However, you do want to be careful about which feats you take, because certain feats are not going to be viable. Polearm Master isn't going to be of any use to you. And always be sure that if your hit points and stuff are going to change, there are some which might seem useful, but perhaps they won't be. And it's one that you really need to kind of talk to your DM and find out if it works in your animal form or not. Like Tough is a good example. Does it only apply to your character when you're in your normal form? Or do you get the extra hit points when you're in animal form? Just be sure to know exactly what it is you're getting into before you buy anything. Go over it with your DM. They'll be happy to help you to build the character correctly. Good feats can also be found within the book. Savage Attacker is not a bad one, because it really helps you to keep that damage high. It's only usable once per turn, but if you do get a low roll, you can pretty much substitute it, so it's worth looking at. Also, one of my favourite feats in the entire game, Sentinel. If you're going to be out front, you want to keep the monsters near you. Sentinel's a really good one. I've always advocated for Sentinel. You've also got like Martial Adept. That's a nice one, isn't it? Because it gets you some of those Battle Master skills. Because you're not going to be over multiclassing, it might actually be a good time to take that. In most situations, when you're doing multiclass characters, you just take the levels of fighter and be done with it. But, like I say, because you don't want to overdo it, perhaps Martial Adept is worth looking at, just to get a couple of maneuvers and, again, a little bit extra damage. And not only that, your saving throw DC is obviously 8 plus proficiency bonus, plus strength or dexterity modifier. Now, some of these animal forms have got some really high strength scores, so saving throws against some of those martial adept abilities is really not going to be an issue half the time. So really consider it. Alright guys, thanks for listening. I'd love to hear about your ideas for your kind of circle druid and how you would build it, and what changes you would make and what multi-classes you would put in. So be sure to use the comments, share your ideas. That's the whole point of comments, to share good ideas. So the routine: like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time at the gaming table.